The transport shuttle rumbled through the atmosphere of Kasara Prime, carrying its cargo of students toward the Central Academy. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her forehead against the viewport, watching the purple-tinted clouds give way to sprawling crystal structures below. She'd traveled 14 light years for this opportunity. The first human accepted into the Galactic Pedagogical Institute's Advanced Childhood Development Program. The other passengers gave her a wide berth. She'd grown used to that over the past 3 months since leaving Earth. Humans were still new to the galactic community, barely 20 years since first contact, and their reputation preceded them. Too aggressive, the newsfeed said. Too emotional, too unpredictable. Most species kept their distance, and Sarah had learned not to take it personally. The Academy building spiraled upward like a massive seashell, its walls shifting between translucent and opaque as internal lighting changed. Sarah's assigned classroom was on the 7th tier, in a section designated for multi-species early learning. She'd memorized the layout weeks ago, studied the teaching philosophies of a dozen different cultures, and prepared herself for the challenges ahead. What she hadn't prepared for was walking into the classroom and finding every seat deliberately occupied. The instructor, a tall Viridian named Protocar with skin like polished jade, stood at the front arranging holographic displays. Around the curved room, 23 students sat in pods designed to accommodate various body types. Every single pod was filled, despite Sarah's registration confirmation and assigned seating in her academic file. "Excuse me," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "I believe there's been a mistake. My pod assignment shows Sector 4, Position 12. Protocar's triple-jointed neck swiveled toward her, his wide eyes blinking in sequence. "Ah, yes. The human. I'm afraid there was an administrative decision made this morning. Due to safety concerns raised by several families, alternative arrangements are being discussed." "Safety concerns?" Sarah's hands tightened on her datapad. "I passed every health screening. My credentials were approved by the Academy Board." Of course, Protocar waved a 6-fingered hand dismissively. "It's not about credentials. It's about compatibility. Humans have such different teaching philosophies, very hands-on, very physical. Some species find this approach disturbing when it comes to their offspring." Sarah glanced around the room. Several students avoided her gaze. A Threxian with blue-feathered crests whispered to her neighbor. 2 Morphians, their slug-like bodies coiled in their specialized seats, seemed to deliberately shift away from the empty space near them. "So where exactly am I supposed to sit?" Sarah asked. "Perhaps you could stand? Humans are quite good at standing for extended periods, I understand. Or there are observation rooms where you could follow along via holofeed until we sort out proper accommodations." The suggestion hit Sarah like a slap. Stand in the back like some kind of outsider? Watch through glass while everyone else participated? She'd worked too hard, come too far, invested too much to accept that. Before she could respond, the main entrance whooshed open again. A line of small beings entered, shepherded by a floating droid. These were the cubs, the children this course was designed to teach them about. Species from across the quadrant, all between what humans would consider 4 to 6 years old developmentally, all at the Academy's Early Learning Center. Sarah's heart sank further. This was supposed to be the highlight of today's session, observing actual cross-species childhood interaction in a controlled environment, and she was going to miss it because nobody wanted her in the room. The cubs filed in with varying degrees of enthusiasm. There were Viridian younglings with soft, pale green skin, their movements still awkward as they learned to control their long limbs. A pair of Threxian chicks chirped and hopped, their downy feathers puffed with excitement. 4 Morphian juveniles left slight moisture trails as they glided across the floor. Even a Croton kit, rarely seen off their homeworld, its crystalline body refracting the light into rainbow patterns. The floating droid, a basic childcare model, began announcing the day's activities. The cubs were supposed to disperse around the room, interacting with the students who would observe their behavior patterns and social development. It was a crucial exercise in understanding how different species approached learning and play. But something unexpected happened. The Viridian younglings, who should have gravitated toward Protocar or the Viridian students in the class, instead made a beeline for Sarah. Their large eyes, still dark with youth, fixed on her with unmistakable curiosity. One of them, barely 3 feet tall, walked right up and tugged on her sleeve. "You're the human," the youngling said in basic, his voice high and melodic. "You're the one from Earth." Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to eye level. "That's right. My name is Dr. Chen. What's your name?" "I'm Mikor. Is it true humans have stories about everything? My clutch father says humans put stories even in their science." Before Sarah could answer, the Threxian chicks fluttered over, unable to sustain flight but managing impressive hops. "Are you really a predator species?" one asked, tilting her head sideways in the Threxian expression of fascination. "You don't look scary." "We're omnivores," Sarah explained gently, aware of every adult eye in the room now watching this interaction. "We eat plants and animals both, but that doesn't make us scary. It just means we evolved differently." A Morphean juvenile, braver than his companions, oozed closer. "Teacher Casilla says humans touch everything with their manipulators. Is that true? Why do you touch so much?" Sarah held out her hand, palm up, letting the youngling examine it. "We learn through touch. It helps us understand texture, temperature, weight. Our hands are very sensitive. See these ridges? They help us grip things and feel tiny details." The Croton kit approached last, moving with the careful deliberation of a being made of living mineral. It said nothing, but its faceted surfaces oriented toward Sarah with clear interest. Within moments, Sarah found herself surrounded. Not by the adult students who'd refused her a seat, but by every single cub in the room. They pressed close with questions, observations, and that universal childhood curiosity that transcended species barriers. "Why is your fur only on your head? Can you really run for hours without stopping? Do you actually cry water from your eyes when you're sad? Is it true humans adopt other species as family?" Sarah answered each question as best she could, her training kicking in automatically. She kept her movements slow and non-threatening, her voice modulated to a soothing register, her explanations clear and age-appropriate. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd studied, what she loved about teaching, reaching young minds regardless of what they looked like. And then something remarkable happened. Mikor, the young Viridian who'd spoken to her first, simply sat down on the floor beside her. Not in a designated learning space, not in a safe pod, but right there on the bare floor next to the human everyone had deemed too dangerous to sit near. "The floor is cold," Sarah said softly. "Are you sure you want to sit there?" "You don't have a seat," Mikor replied with the straightforward logic of childhood. "So I'll sit with you. It's not fair you have to stand." One of the Threxian chicks immediately plopped down on Sarah's other side. Then the Morphean juveniles formed a semicircle in front of her. The Croton kit settled nearby with a sound like wind chimes. Within 30 seconds, every single cub in the room had abandoned the planned activity zones and arranged themselves around the human who had no seat. The silence from the adult students was deafening. Protocar's skin flushed from jade to a darker olive, a sign of agitation in Viridians. "Younglings, please return to your designated learning sectors. We have a curriculum to follow." "But Dr. Chen is teaching us," Mikor said, his voice carrying that peculiar stubbornness that young children of every species seem to possess. "She's answering our questions." "She doesn't even have a chair," added one of the Threxian chicks. "That's not fair." The childcare droid floated uncertainly, its programming clearly not prepared for this scenario. It emitted a soft chime, trying to redirect the cubs, but they ignored it completely. Sarah felt a swell of emotion she had to carefully suppress. These children, these youngsters, from species that had been spacefaring for millennia while humans were still figuring out agriculture, they saw past the prejudice. They didn't care about humanity's reputation or their species' violent history. They just saw someone who was being treated unfairly, and they responded with the pure moral clarity that only children possess. "Dr. Chen," Protokar said, his tone strained, "perhaps you should go ahead and use Observation Room 7 after all. You're disrupting the planned activities." "I'm not doing anything," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm exactly where you told me to be, standing because there was no seat for me. The younglings made their own choice about where to sit." A Morphean student, one who'd been particularly vocal about not wanting Sarah in the class, spoke up. "This is ridiculous. Send the human away and the cubs will return to normal." "Will we?" Mikor crossed his arms in a gesture he'd probably learned from human holovids. "Dr. Chen is nice. She explains things. She doesn't talk down to us like we're stupid." "Yeah," chirped a Threxian chick. "And she got down on our level. Nobody else ever gets down on our level." Sarah's throat tightened. That simple observation cut through every academic theory, every cross-cultural training module, every diplomatic briefing she'd received. She'd knelt because it felt natural, because meeting someone at eye level was basic human courtesy, especially with children. She hadn't realized how significant that gesture would be in a galaxy where many species saw physical lowering as submission or weakness. The Croton kit spoke for the first time, its voice like crystals resonating. "The human has no fear of the floor, no fear of being small. Why should we fear sitting with her?" Another long silence filled the classroom. Sarah could see the calculation happening behind multiple sets of eyes. The cubs had made their choice, and forcing them away from the human now would create exactly the kind of scene that administrators dreaded. It would also raise questions about why the human wasn't given proper accommodation in the first place. Finally, one of the students, a quiet Viridian female named Solara, who'd been sitting in the back, stood up. She gathered her materials and walked down to where Sarah stood surrounded by children. "This is foolish," Solara said, but she was looking at Protokar, not Sarah. "We are here to learn about childhood development across species, yes? And we are witnessing a perfect demonstration of natural cross-species bonding and moral development in action. Yet we want to disrupt it because of our own prejudices?" She turned to Sarah. "I apologize for the behavior of this class, myself included. Would you please share my pod? It's designed for Viridians, so it should accommodate your frame adequately." The offer hung in the air like a lifeline. Sarah wanted to accept immediately, but she looked down at the circle of young faces around her first. "Would you younglings be all right if I sat in a proper seat? I could still answer your questions from there." "Only if we can stay near you," Mikor said firmly. "We're not going back to the boring zones." Protokar made a sound like escaping steam. His authority was crumbling and everyone in the room knew it, but he also knew that forcing the issue would only make things worse. "Fine," he said at last. "Reconfigure the pods into a discussion circle. If the younglings want an impromptu session with Dr. Chen, then we'll observe how a human handles multi-species childhood education. Consider it a practical examination." There was a challenge in those words, a hint that he expected Sarah to fail, to prove that human methods wouldn't work with such a diverse group. But Sarah heard something else too, an opportunity. As the students rearranged their pods into a loose circle and the cubs settled around Sarah's borrowed seat, she took a deep breath and began to teach. Not from a curriculum, not from approved materials, but from the heart of what she knew about children. She told them stories because Mikor was right. Humans did put stories in everything. She explained developmental milestones by comparing how different species learn to walk, fly, slither, or crystallize. She asked the cubs questions and actually listened to their answers, validating their thoughts even when they were wonderfully, charmingly wrong. She demonstrated human hand games and was delighted when a Threxian chick figured out how to play pat-a-cake with her wings. She discussed emotional regulation by sharing how human children dealt with fear and watched understanding dawn in alien eyes. She even sang a simple Earth lullaby, and the Morphean juveniles hummed along in their subsonic register, creating an unplanned harmony that raised goosebumps on her arms. 2 hours passed like minutes. When the session finally ended and the child care droid came to collect the cubs, there were groans of disappointment from multiple species. Mikor hugged Sarah's leg in the Viridian gesture of affection. The Threxian chicks performed a little dance of appreciation. Even the reserved Croton kit chimed a melody that the translation software labeled as gratitude and respect. As the younglings filed out, still chattering excitedly about the human teacher, Sarah remained in Solara's borrowed pod. The other students were packing up, and she could feel the weight of their stares. Protokar approached, his expression unreadable. That was highly irregular. Yes, Sarah agreed. She wasn't going to apologize. It was also, he continued slowly, one of the most effective demonstrations of intuitive cross-species pedagogy I've witnessed in 15 years of teaching this course. Sarah blinked in surprise. The younglings responded to you because you did something most species find difficult. You made yourself vulnerable. You accepted an unfair situation with grace. You met them at their level, both physically and emotionally. And children, regardless of species, recognize authenticity. He paused, his skin shifting back toward Jade. I was wrong to allow the seating situation. It was prejudice masquerading as caution, and that has no place in education. Tomorrow you will have your assigned pod, and if anyone objects, they can take it up with me directly. Several students shifted uncomfortably. The Morphean who'd called for Sarah's removal looked distinctly embarrassed. Solara spoke up again. I think we all learned something today. Perhaps that was the real lesson. As Sarah finally gathered her things and headed for the exit, she found Mikor waiting in the hallway with his clutch father, a tall, adult Viridian with deep green skin. Dr. Chen, the adult said formally, my offspring has not stopped talking about you. He says you are a real teacher, not like the ones who just recite information. He's a wonderful student, Sarah replied honestly. Curious, thoughtful, and very brave. He told me you had no seat, that the others excluded you. The clutch father's eyes darkened. And he told me that this did not make you angry or mean. Instead, you taught anyway. That is what I want my offspring to learn, that knowledge and kindness matter more than comfort or acceptance. He placed a hand on Mikor's head in the Viridian blessing gesture. You honor your species, Dr. Chen. Perhaps we have underestimated humans. As Sarah rode the transport back to her quarters that evening, she thought about the day's events. She'd come to the academy hoping to learn, to bridge gaps between species, to prove that humans had something valuable to contribute to the galactic community. She'd expected to do it through academic excellence, through research and study. Instead, she'd done it by sitting on the floor with children who didn't care about her species' reputation. They'd seen someone being treated unfairly and responded with simple, pure empathy. In doing so, they'd taught the adults in the room far more than any lecture could have. Tomorrow, she'd have her seat. But Sarah suspected she'd spend a lot more time on the floor anyway, because that's where the best learning happened. That's where you could look students in the eye and see them as they really were, not as categories or species or potential threats, but as young minds hungry for understanding. The galaxy had a lot to teach humanity, she knew. But maybe, just maybe, humanity had a few things to teach the galaxy too. starting with the radical notion that fairness, kindness, and getting down on someone else's level were universal values worth defending, even if you had to sit on the cold floor to do it.